I work as a consultant with early to mid-stage startups. So I really love I'm even working with customers like pre-launch right now, right? So it's kind of fun. It's a little bit of of an interesting space when you don't have customers. You're starting to build really the foundation. So everything that I talk about in these two slides is kind of foundational. For if you're further along in your journey, you might say, hey, we have that. But if you're early stage, or if you're starting to build up, what your CS process is going to look like, this is kind of what I specialize in. So I wanted to give you the example of car insurance when you're thinking about what risk management really is trying to achieve. So we all pay for insurance to cover future risk, right? We're not sure what may happen, and the insurance company is not sure either. And what they do is they create a risk profile of you based on your past experiences and based on essentially lagging data in order to form what your premiums are going to be. In a lot of ways, we do the same thing in customer success, right? We have data, use it to the best of our ability. I use the example of a health score, and we really try to do what we can to have, this health score be predictive. And maybe with a product like Foresight, it is more predictive, but you really are relying on data to create a risk profile for your companies or for your clients. So, what are some of the things that, are kind of essential when you're doing this? If you want to create a great risk profile, and things that I talk about, and like I have like a CS 101 course for really early stage companies, it's like, do this stuff first, right? And it's, understand customer outcomes or what they could be, right? You might not know today, you're going to do your best guess if you don't have any customers, but if you do, ask them, right? And document that. Harness clean data. Most people don't have clean data. So that leads you down the path of you're not going to have great scores, or you're not going to have great outcomes of prediction. So make sure your data is as clean as possible. That means your contract data. That means your utilization data. That means what your customers are telling you, that you're kind of keeping it up to date. And then design for organizational factors. So there are things that are going to scale up and scale down your health score, escalations. So those are like three kind of fundamentals that I often share. I've kind of broken this down on the next slide into, I like a mnemonic or like a catchy sort of phrase. So Jared, if you could go to the next slide, catchy kind of way to remember things. This is like a framework that is kind of, if you're, designing out your first sort of strategy, what are the factors that come into play, right? So H.E.L.P just kind of naturally came about. It was actually in a different order, and I like reordered it because I really like the mnemonic. Okay, health is designing a health score that predicts, right? So going back to, you need clean data, you need to really understand what it is that you are seeking after, and you need to have organizational alignment. One of the things that I learned from a very late stage company, that is one of the things that sticks in my mind forever, is that their health score, with the drop of a point, could predict what revenue was at risk. They had this really robust operations team that was able to design this. And the whole organization knew, like the CEO knew, if the health score drops, this much revenue is at risk. And I thought, wow, that is so powerful. That might be harder for the early stage company to design, right, today, but we can start to do the building blocks, right? Having organizational alignment, having clean data, really understanding what are some of the predictive measures we can put in place. Your health score is likely going to evolve. We all know this, right? You're probably not going to have one version of it. But what can you do now in the foundational stage to build a great base, right? Then come those triggers, or those, as I call it, those levers, which may scale up or scale down your health score. Those are your escalations. Now, escalations by nature are negative or seen as negative, but I actually think there are positive escalations as well. An escalation that's positive, an example of that could be an expansion. An expansion could be a point of escalation where you actually have to now re-implement or rebuild or retrain, right? So that could be considered an escalation depending on how your organization looks at it. Typically, we're looking at more negative factors. One of the things that early stage companies don't do well, and Seth, you hit the nail on the head, is they don't know when to stop fighting fires. So, okay, set the stage. You work at a company, let's just say you have 10 customers. Doesn't matter, who's the biggest and who's the smallest. But if one of 10 customers is at risk to churn, what do you think happens? The alarm goes off, right? If one of 1,000 customers is at risk to churn, you're really probably going to ask more questions. You're going to say, oh, who is it? Like, what's happening? Do we have a good sense of things? When the numbers are low, the stakes feel higher. But if everyone in your organization is a firefighter, you're really not going to be able to manage your proactive workflow, right? So that's where having an escalation framework that your key leaders are aligned to, and really working to define at which severity do we get certain people involved, right? I think there's people that do all kinds of fun things. Like I have a friend who made like an escalation dial, right? And on this dial, they had, okay, if it's a level, level one, CSM will handle. If it's a level two, manager gets involved. If it's a level three, so on and so forth, right? Maybe the director gets involved. Maybe the CEO has to get involved at some point. But is the CEO getting involved with that level one? No, right? And they made sure to align that so that there's not this constant sense of firefighting and you can actually be progressing your business forward. Okay, so you've got your health score, you got your triggers or the things that are gonna lever it. Now you also are gonna always have lagging data. And kind of going back to the insurance, kind of metaphor, not all data can be predictive. So there are going to be lagging indicators. I use NPS as an example. NPS, everyone knows, is a point in time piece of data, right? So while your NPS might be a part of your health score for a month, you might have only got one NPS like response, right, in that month. So how do you actually look ahead and say, all right, if I have lagging data, in my data set, I might have to reduce some of how it impacts that health score, right? Or I might have to change the balance of things. So companies I worked at in the past, we use CSPs a lot, and they would allow you to like scale every health score measure, right? How much weight does this health score measure have? This is where your lagging data might be something that you say, hey, this is going to be something I don't give as much weight to because it's NPS and I only see it once in a while, once every 3 months or whatever. There could be another, kind of indicator that you say, hey, I need to give this, more weight, right? So just because it lags doesn't mean it's bad data, because that's really unfortunately the root of how you're going to design your health score. But you want to have and understand what those lagging data are so that you can start to predict for them, right? Hey, this little piece might come in, it might impact the health score. How am I going to talk to my organization about this? I think the last bit here for mitigating risk, right, is performance. And this is kind of, I think, what a lot of Nigel was talking about. So don't have to speak too heavily to, a lot of what you were saying about the value of understanding if your customers are receiving value. I think in an early stage company, it's as simple as asking, right? We have to do that work. I have a client right now. We just launched, the first like sort of round of implementation in January. We're in April, right? Now we're getting to the point where we're like, now we need to sit down and start doing success discussions because we have enough data now, finally, right? To show them something and make sure that that's what they want to see. Take it a step further, though. How is that customer's performance going to evolve, right? So if you're in the early stage, like where I am right now, you have a lot of early data and you don't fully recognize what a risk could look like in the future because you may not have customer maturity. So a lot of what I do and design with companies is we try to predict what a mature customer should behave like. And we base that on performance. So we say, what is expectation in year one? What is expectation in year two? What is expectation in year three of using our product? If you want a product someone's going to use for 20 years, you kind of have to think in a 20-year span. What does that maturity look like? Am I continuing to deliver that value so that they're going to continuously be a customer? So that's kind of a little overview of the framework that I apply. There's other elements of performance in here that I don't have in this slide, but your product performance is really important, right? This is where the cross-functional aspect of your company really, I think, comes into play. Is as much as CS is responsible for this, we're kind of responsible to be the communicator. We're not necessarily responsible to make sure all this is happening. This is where you really need to collaborate. Like if value is not being achieved because there are a lot of bugs, those are things that CS is going to be involved with actually performing risk mitigation and actually escalating. So hopefully that's helpful, and I would love to answer any questions if there are any, but if not, I'm happy to pass the baton.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great. Let's move on to, I believe, Diane. I think you're next.
Unmute. Hi. Thanks, Pearl. Really helpful. So I've been, doing SaaS post-sales work for the last 30 years, and the framework I've built starts with two principles that I just have seen to be true, regardless of the product, whether it's SaaS or a product that you You go and buy your grocery store, right? Customers renew and buy more for any subscription-based thing or any repeat service or product if two things are true. One is they feel valued. That means that they're having a good experience. So that's, if anybody's ever called our phone service provider, we know that they don't really nail that one very well, but you don't feel valued because they've designed their processes around themselves, which is why they keep asking you for your name and your social and your husband's name and your daughter's name and your, pet's name every time they transfer you. So it doesn't feel like you're valued. It feels like it's about them, or you're at the Whole Foods and the cashier is talking to each other while you're paying $5 for an apple. It doesn't feel like a good experience. That's thing one. You have to feel like you're getting a good experience. For a SaaS company, that's like, is support feel good? Do you like the people you're working with? Is billing easy? All the things, right? And then the second one is, after feeling valued, is actually getting value. And this is really what I love so much about Foresight, because I can be having a great experience with the company. We've all seen this as SaaS leaders, right? You get to renewal time and your customer says, I love working with your CSMs, your support team is awesome, but my boss doesn't see the value. Right, that's like that's the bane of our existence as CS leaders. And so the most important thing is that, in addition to feeling like I'm having a great experience, I have to actually be able to articulate the value that I'm getting from that. And what's interesting here is that if you aren't having a great experience, but you are getting value, you'll probably renew. But if you're just having a great experience and not getting value, you won't. So these are not necessarily equal, but you think about it, if you go go to your restaurant and they treat you incredibly well, but it costs like $1 million for the meal, probably not, right? But if the meal's really good and it's, pretty reasonably priced, but your experience is kind of meh, you might still go back. So that's the way to think about it. So think about those two pillars as we move to the next slide. So you might just want to, didn't mean to animate, but just go ahead and click in case I think there's some other stuff there. So keep going, yeah. So here's the way to think about it. As you look at the life cycle, and these are sort of the classic post-sales milestones, right? But there may be more, there may be less. And I'm actually a fan of starting pre-sales, but not for this group. You really want to look through those two lenses, experience and value, at each of these stages. So for example, think about, I'm the customer. I just bought. I told your sales rep a bunch of stuff during the sales cycle. I probably spent a ton of time in meetings with them. And now I'm introduced to my post-sales person and they go, right, so tell me about your business. Like the worst, right? It's the worst experience ever. That's the kind of thing where they don't really understand, what my key value drivers are. They don't understand my problems. At that same time, you want to understand at the outset, like, why did the customer buy? And, they may not, and very often, very, very often, SaaS salespeople, they do a pitch deck, they convince the customer to buy. And then when you sit down for that handoff meeting, the sales rep, and you say to the sales rep, so tell me why they bought. They're like, well, because they really like this feature and they need to solve this problem. And, they don't have any, it's not like they need to improve their lead, top of funnel leads by 10% every quarter. There's nothing crisp, right? It's always like, we killed it on the demo, or they've been struggling with inventory for a long time, and so they needed a solution. It's always pretty big and mushy. And so again, what I love about Foresight is it sort of forces the questions. It enables you to ask the kinds of questions of customers that, force is a harsh word, but causes them to give you crisp, articulatable outcomes. So instead of saying, I bought because we really need an inventory solution, I say, I bought because I want to have 10% fewer out of stock notices a month. There's an actual metric that they care about that they're trying to improve. So being really clear on the value at the start of the journey, and I would just say, even if you're a sales rep and you're not using that ahead of the time, it is the post-sales team's job to have that conversation with the customer. So if you don't do that and you go, okay, let's go into onboarding, and you take them through all the onboarding and you're doing all the things, and you get through onboarding, they're like, okay, so you're in onboarding, and they're like, okay, but I don't really like, so I'm now 3 or 4 months in. I can't really point to, maybe I'm having a good experience, but I can't point to any increased outcomes that I'm getting. That's the second lens, right? Is how do you make sure that you're having that conversation with what great looks like? And it can't be squishy. It can't be like, love ya, software's cool. Can't be, I mean, it can be those, but it should also be really clear outcomes. And you can do that without a tool like Foresight. But let me tell you, I've implemented Foresight. It's a game changer. I mean, when I found out about that, I'm not trying to sell for you here, Nigel, but I've spent 30 years doing this manually in spreadsheets, tracking outcomes that they cared about, getting, what's the baseline when they start and tracking it later. And it is hard. And so Foresight, I think, has cracked the code. I'm like just pissed that they didn't do it 25 years ago. So like, where were you? Okay, maybe you weren't born yet. I get it. But so that's the second thing, is think about, at the through the value lens at the beginning, do you know what good looks like for them, what success looks like? And then when you're going through onboarding, is that path to onboarding really clear? Are you trying to, I mean, often what software companies do, and I call this, like, they read the customer the cookbook instead of teaching them how to cook something. Always funny that I use cooking because I never cook ever. But the idea here is that, a lot of companies during kickoff and launch, they like, let me show you everything you can do in our product, instead of, here are the 10 things you need to know to achieve the outcomes you most care about. Once you've gotten there, we're going to show you the next 10 things, and then the next 10 things. So often people get stuck in onboarding because they haven't gone through all the training, or they haven't taken had the sessions on some obscure features. So that's first thing, is like, is there a clear, direct path to launch? And at launch, will some value have been achieved? Will the customer be able to say, okay, I get it. I get there's a ton of features we didn't learn about, but man, we're already starting to see that one metric, the needle on that one metric, move a little bit, or we can see that it's going to start moving. So that's the second thing. And again, as you move post kickoff and launch, you use those same two lenses. And from an experience perspective, what that means is, importantly, are you meeting the customer where they are? And what I mean by that is, we all go into this like, okay, we want to have a cadence meeting once a week, we want to have a QBR once a quarter, and they're like, I have 47,000 vendors. Like, that's not a thing that's going to happen. But we stick to our guns, right? And we're like, nope, my CSP tells me I need to be meeting with you, and I'm getting dinged by my manager for not meeting with you. No, you need to figure out what works for the customer, especially for your executive buyers and sponsors. Maybe they want a text. Maybe they'd respond to a Loom video once every few months. You need to think about, from the customer's perspective, if they want a buffet and you're like, no, we got to have a sit down meal, they will not have a good experience, and you will be resisted and they will be that customer who goes dark on you. So meet them where they are in terms of how they want to interact with you, and then keep coming back to, hey, you said you'd renew if you achieve these 3 outcomes. Let's look at them, and let's look at whether you're achieving them or not. And if not, what are the things you need to do and we need to do to get there? So again, it's just like a really high level. There's a much more detailed framework below this. But at a high level, when I do an assessment for any company, any one of my customers, I start here. I look at each stage through these lenses. And then there's a third lens, which I'm not talking about here today, which is scale. Is the way you're achieving these things today scalable? And that, scale can mean you just need to get to, through next year, or it could be, I want this plan to last me for 10 years. But these are the two lenses that I use, and it covers most of the ground you're going to need to make sure the customer is both having a good experience and getting value from the solution.
Wonderful. Thank you, Diane. Real quick before we move on, I'm having issues seeing the chat. I can't locate it. So if any of the panelists, if you see questions come in and you have the answer, feel free to answer it. But I, for some reason, can't see it with the shared screen. So just figured I would add that in there. Okay, Seth, you are next, my friend.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And I think a lot of the things that Parul and Diane have shared, I think, are spot on, no matter the size or scale of your business. Previous to my new gig, I was working in an enterprise level business called ZoomInfo. If you haven't heard of it, but a lot of these things still come to play. And I think when you're dealing with a high volume of customers and a large customer success organization, it's really important to have some of these foundations in place. And one thing I also want to call out is I think Foresight's a huge opportunity. Health scoring and CSPs are great systems, but you have to use them the right way, and your business changes a lot. So, for instance, you could have a customer that is showing all greens in Gainsight, for instance, as an early warning system, and you're saying, hey, adoption, sentiment, NPS is all green, and then they end up churning. And I think from a CS leader, you're like, oh my goodness. Those are I think sometimes the worst ones, because you're like, what do you mean this churn? All of our indicators are showing that these are great. I think the challenge is really understanding value. So it goes back to even what Parul and I was talking about. It's like, what value means? What does value mean to the customer? You don't want to force feed those recipes, like Diane was saying. It's like, what does value mean in a simple term for why they purchased your product? So I think it's really important, and I think that that's what's so cool about having an edge. As a CS leader, you need an edge to mitigate risk, and I think that Foresight has something there. It's really important because it allows them to be the driver in their own success, not us force feeding something down their throat. Nonetheless, really important to have indicators. It doesn't matter if it's coming from usage, sentiment, whatever you think, support. All of these are factors. So I think no matter what, make sure you have some early warning systems in place. The other piece is, I think, especially in a large enterprise level business, is you have to be able to understand root causes, right? And they can come from, I like it in like a 3 bucket is, value and adoption is really, I would say, in the CS realm, we should be responsible. We need to know what value is for them. We need to make sure that, hey, if they're not using it, they're never going to see value. There's also things like performance and reliability. Especially in SaaS and technology, things break. So understanding like where these things are coming from, if it's a bug related issue, is very different to address it or get in front of it versus a value piece. And then also commercial, right? We love your product, your support, your CS team are great. We can't quantify value, or it's just too expensive, right? An enterprise level business, these are huge amounts of their budgets being factored into this. This will help us understand what route we could take to try and mitigate the risk. And then I think automation is really important, but big caveat, you don't want automation or alert burnout. If you're working with a ton of customers and every minute you're getting alert, you as a CSM or a leader are not going to know which ones to prioritize. And we want to make sure that if there is an alert and there really is a fire, that we can bring in the right type of people to help hopefully support it. The other piece is data-driven reporting. Parul, you made a great point about just data quality. If your data is not good, then you got to really make sure you have that in place. So making sure that when you do have those systems in place, they can be really helpful to identify what's going on, what are the types of themes that are coming out of it, what are the types of risks that are coming, and hopefully it gives you enough information to quantify and showcase the volume of where we need to prioritize, whether it's going to product or going to sales and talking about different things we need to explore or consider. It's really important. So data, we're all in this world, in this data-driven world, we need to make sure we're using the data correctly, or else it would actually put us even at more risk. Time to resolution, and also like root cause analysis. I think that this is also really important. When you identify a risk, okay, what happens? And maybe taking a snapshot of that type of usage for that customer, where they were, and then being able to hopefully map out, well, when CS was involved and we did X, Y, and Z, what were the outcomes? So I think it's really important to figure out, well, how quick it was done, what was the issues to address it, but also understanding post-mortem, like, did we actually move the needle here? Were we able to put in a motion to resolve those things? And that leads into the risk mitigation motions as well, which I think is really important, which is like, at scale is standardizing motions. I'm sure some people have heard about playbooks. I think that they're great, but sometimes you can over engineer these things. The way we've tried to think about it in some of my previous roles is like, what's the CSM's responsibility? What are the questions that we need to maybe ask the customer or internally? Who are the types of people we need to maybe address it? And really, what is that escalation process, right? Like, how are we able to get in front of it with the right people that I think some of the panelists have said before? Are there ways that we can also remedy it? Is there, experience remedies that we can do? And then also make sure that we have clear escalation paths. And that is that piece here is we cannot all fight the fires. From a scalable business, we cannot do that. So how can we do this when a CSM is sometimes the Lone Ranger? How can I, as a CSM, feel that I'm getting the support that I need, but I'm also doing my due diligence for my own book of business? So if you go into the next slide, I think it hopefully will help provide some best practices. From an escalation management perspective, you'd never want to feel like you're on your own. So it's creating those raising hand features, no matter how big your CS org is or how small, making sure you can do it as a team is really important because, I think if we're all centered around a customer, then we all have to help, and that could be cross-departmentally. And those escalation paths and criteria, whether it's IC to manager, here are the things I'm going to be asking my CSM to do their due diligence, right? Before asking for help. When it's going to the next level of escalation, we need to vet, right, before it goes up to the CEO. You want to make sure you've kind of looked at underneath every rock and every stone to make sure that you've been able to address it and understand what the action or the request is as you move those things up. So it's really important to do that. And what we've tried to do is just make sure that we have a couple safeguards in place to make sure that there is people reviewing this. They are responsible as much as the individual, and it keeps on going up until we get to those C levels where if we need it, we can get it. I talked about a bit of resolution rates and outcomes, but other key metrics to track is like, did we see improvements to whatever way we're measuring success, whether it's health and adoption, sentiment, you name it. But the pre and post can really help to see if those types of playbooks or motions actually provided the solution. And if they do, maybe we can find ways to iterate or double down on those. Or if they didn't, maybe that's not the right approach for that type of situation. So that really goes into the refinement of the prescribed motions. And I think what's really important from leadership perspective is if you're able to organize your risk, what churned, what didn't, what contracted and what not, but also creating different themes, it will help you as the leader surface the potential remedies or trends that we're seeing with cross-departmental leaders. If the product isn't working and people are failing to see value, we need to be able to quantify and rationalize some challenges that might need to be prioritized from the business. And I think no matter what, real-time signals are really important. We can't have lagging signals. So it goes back to the data quality piece where you got to make sure that all those kind of systems are aligned. We have a new kind of role that I've seen in the past couple of years. CS Ops been super helpful to make sure that all of our systems align with the rest of the business systems as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Seth.
Sure.
So based on the slides, everything we talked about, panelists, anything to add? Any further insights? These are all great. Okay. Well, we have got, let's see, bring this up a little bit more here. We have got about a little more than 10 minutes left. So I'm going to pose one of the planned questions and we'll discuss that one. And then again, if anyone has any further questions about what Foresight can do for you, what anything that these panelists talked about, connect with them on LinkedIn, ask them. These are very highly engaged individuals on LinkedIn, so I'm sure they would be more than happy to take any questions in the LinkedIn DMs. But if I just put you all on the spot and you're like, no one DM me, let me know and I'll correct myself. But I think you're all okay with that. Okay, so the question that I want to pose to you, and Diane, I think we'll start with you. It is, what early warning indicators have you found most reliable for identifying customers at risk? And how do you establish the thresholds that trigger your intervention process?
In order, the most critical one is slow onboarding. And it's slow for any reason. They're not showing up to the meetings. They're not, giving you access to files that you need. Uh, they're hard to get a hold of. You're running into technical issues. But if the onboarding should take 30 days and you're 15 days in and you're not 50% of the way through, and so the threshold really depends on if you have like a standard 3-month onboarding process, which I would argue is too long for time to first value, but let's just say that that's it. If you're through month 1 and you're not a third of the way through, customers at risk. 100% the customers at risk. That is your best early warning sign. And again, it can be for any reason. It can be that, the person who bought it was supposed to do an intro to the project team and just hasn't because he or she's off on vacation and has other priorities. It could be that, they did the handoff and the person they gave it to doesn't believe in it. There'd be any number of things going on. But if for any reason your onboarding is slower than it should be, and that as early as possible, you want to circle the wagons with the AE and the buyer and talk about the risk of to success. And again, the slowness is relative to how long it should take. The second one is, when you get through onboarding, you should be able to contact the executive buyer, you or the account manager, the CSM or the account manager, and say, right, we're through it and we've achieved this value. Are you aligned that this is can we all agree that that's a good thing, that we're on track? If you can't get a hold of that person, if you can't have that conversation, it's sort of like a first mini business review. That's the second point of warning. Like, that person should be really eager to hear from someone about how their money is being spent and the value that it's providing. And then the last one, which just takes longer, is you should have a map of what, based on the customer's desired outcomes, what healthy adoption looks like. So for them to achieve a specific outcome, they've got to adopt these 10 features over this period of time. And so if you say it's these 10 features, in the first 6 months, they should have done the first 4, and the last 6 months, they should do the rest. And you kind of look at where they are, and they get to month 6, they've only done the first 2. That's also, so this idea of having what good adoption looks like relative to what they're trying to accomplish. If there's a key feature they need to adopt to get to, they're happy, they're cranking away, they're in the product all the time, they're saying wonderful things, but there's a thing they have to do to get to an outcome, and they're not doing it against your time scale. That's the third leading indicator. So it's like time to adopt relative to what they should be, and not the whole thing, not all the features and all the products of all the worlds, just the ones that are important to them. And so that's my third one. And there's a ton of other ones, but those are the ones I find are most often overlooked. You get health scores, you get all the things, and those are super important. But the ones that sort of fly under the radar are these.
Agreed. Anything to add, panelists?
They were pretty spot on. I would just say that when we think about onboarding and why I think it's so important is that it is one of the most sensitive times. It's going from convincing a customer to put their investment in something that they've probably not done before. And that is the most sensitive time, I think, in the customer journey. And the longer it takes for them to see the value, ease of use, leverage it for whatever they're trying to do, the longer that takes, it will be a continuous uphill battle to try and bring them back to feeling confident about that investment. So I would just double down on what Diane said, is it really needs to be a hyper focus. I think also the unresponsiveness throughout onboarding is really going to be a key factor, right? People might be the decision maker, but they might not be they might not be the operator implementing it. So making sure that there's that open dialogue and consistent dialogue when it needs to happen is really key, because sometimes you get a marching order. It's kind of hard when you're just working with the the operator to make sure that that's value. They're just trying to get their job. They have different KPIs. So making sure that there is that clear alignment throughout, and that we're making sure that that is captured and that we have those conversations are key as well.
I have a quick comment. I mean, I fully agree with onboarding. I think you guys are spot on. I think one trigger that I've been adding to my list of late whenever I'm talking to customers is stakeholder change. So even the best onboarding, even the best adoption, even the best like QBRs. I had a couple of experiences early in my career where stakeholder changed and we were delivering amazing value for these customers. And they're like, I like this other tool better. We're going to churn, and it's like, oh my gosh. So that to me, that like is a later in your maturity, perhaps after you've delivered a great onboarding and you've done great. Don't like, it's easy to hang out in the green and say, we're in the green. But that to me is one of those. And Diane had posted it in the host chat of like a watermelon metric that everything might be looking rosy on the outside, but when you actually look on the inside, that turns everything to red for me.
I love that too. To build off of that, ZoomInfo provides that kind of information, right? For contact or account level changes to business. Changes to business happen all the time, especially these days, right? So, making sure from a data perspective or insight perspective to know when those changes are can really be a huge opportunity that can either make or break your business, but also for you to be proactive, right? And to say, hey, I've identified that there has been a change, whether it's a little bit more manual and your LinkedIn, you're connected to your contacts and you can find out when they've made those changes, or you can leverage data to get those signals. That's huge. In a perfect world, we know. But there are systems out there, there are software providers and data providers out there to give you that information, and it's huge. Misaligned points of contact can break your business. So if you're only talking to someone in, I don't know, enablement or ops, and you should be talking to the sales lead, well, if you're not talking and you have had no conversations or dialogues, you're probably in a completely different lane that will not provide the expected outcome you want. Love that.
Nigel, you're muted. I see that you're.
Yeah, there we go. I got it. I just wanted to call out something that Diane had referenced there, because I think it's such a critical, small nuance, but ultimately has massive implications. And Diane, you had talked about mapping out the use cases, right? What a customer should be doing at each phase of the journey. And I think what that represents for me is this perfect blend of like the usage data tells you, right, where, if that action is being taken, if they're accessing that page of the system, et cetera. But the usage is not the objective. It is the outcomes that customers want to achieve. And what I loved about what you talked about, and is just permeates everything that you preach in terms of what good post-sales looks like, is validating with the customer at each phase of the journey of what outcomes they want to achieve, and positioning usage as a means to achieve that desired business outcome. And I think that's just so critical at each phase. And I thought about that in the personnel changes that you mentioned, Pearl, because I think going and saying, oh, look, people are logging in all the time, to that new stakeholder who's coming in, that's not cutting it, right? It needs to be, these are the outcomes that we are achieving because of people logging in order to do so. But I think what it all just means for me is the critical nature of like bringing your buyers into the journey and contextualizing everything that has to do with your vendor customer relationship through the lens of what matters to them. And anyway, so I think it's turning that to be customer centric at every possible opportunity is just a slight reframing of the same information we're used to, but ultimately has such enormous implications when you think about the long-term success of an account.